Welcome to the Scott My Show, a podcast where we talk about bodybuilding, health improvement, and physique enhancement. Before we get into the show, I just wanted to let you know that I do offer one-on-one coaching. If you're interested in working with me, I offer personalized coaching where I can help you reach your goals, whether it be fat loss, building muscle, improving your health, or all the above. I provide tailored nutrition, training, and supplementation advice, one or all of those together, with 24/7 ongoing support to help you every step of the way with any questions you may have. If you're interested, you can DM me on Instagram, click the link in my profile to fill out a form, or ask any questions you may have. Also, we can hop on a free consult call where we can go over your goals, answer questions, and discuss what it would look like to work together. The show is brought to you by Element Electrolytes, and for a limited time, the Element Chocolate Medley is available with 3 flavors: chocolate mint, chocolate chai, and chocolate raspberry. They all go really well in any hot beverage, whether it's coffee, tea, or just a glass of hot water. And I personally love Element Electrolytes, and my wife does too. We've been using them for years. They're a great way to help boost performance, to help you get in the proper amount of electrolytes for a day, and help regulate brain health, physical health. Uh, Salt is important for a lot of things, and just drinking plain water doesn't get you the electrolytes you need. So check out Element in the description, or you can go to drinkelement.com/Scott Mize, and there you'll be able to get a free sample pack when you use my link and help support the show. Thank you. This is a quick disclaimer before we start the show. This show is for entertainment purposes only. Nothing said here should be taken as medical advice, and please consult with your physician before making any changes to your diet, exercise regime, or medications. Thank you, and on to the show. All right, I'm very excited today. Austin Stout is one of the most widely respected minds in the bodybuilding industry. He's a successful longtime coach, educator, mentor, and competitive bodybuilder. Austin is the founder of Integrated Muscle and Health, IMH, which takes a passionate and dynamic approach to physique enhancement and health. The IMH Mentorship program is one of the space's longest standing and most widely recognized educational services, focusing on functional health, physique enhancement, and coaching psychology. Austin's also the co-owner and co-formulator of Pure Factor Formulations, a line of high-quality supplements designed to support your health and wellness goals. He's knowledgeable about all things bodybuilding, functional health, physique and health development, and he's considered a subject matter expert on digestion, as well as identifying root causes of complex health issues. Welcome to the show, Austin.
That was a mouthful. I do a
It's
lot of
all true.
stuff,
You
huh?
do a lot. Yeah. So yeah, I listened to a ton of content of yours. I followed you for a very long time. So the question I'm dying to ask you is, tell us about your car collection.
My car collection. So that's the thing. I don't know if I have I'm not the guy to go on YouTube like the Dubai car collection where he's got, yeah, it's not that. Um, I grew up around cars, so my dad's owned an automotive business for years. My grandfather actually started it in the 60s, believe it or not. So it's still
Wow.
the same business. Back when they came out and cleaned your windshield and did all the stuff. It was a 76 station, which is old school.
Oh, cool.
Pump
Yeah,
your
I know.
gas, all that stuff. So I got into that kind of organically. I have a couple, I'm more of a GM guy, so I have a Z06 Corvette, heavily modified.
Cool.
Um, I'm more into the modified stuff. I do have a
Yeah.
Cadillac ATS-V too, that's more tame. But the Vet's the main one if you want to go out and really have some fun.
Rip it. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
awesome. That's really cool. It's really cool to see like people who have so much depth and knowledge in one area have like hobbies that they're really passionate about outside of
Yeah.
it too.
It's important, man. I think a lot of people in this space could probably benefit from having some hobbies.
Yeah,
Honestly.
being a little less one-dimensional.
Yeah, for sure.
Cool. And so I'd like to talk about give us your background, like how you got into bodybuilding, coaching, education, and kind of what brought you to where you are today.
Yeah, so I've told this general story quite a few times, but I think my early years probably were pretty similar to a lot of people, athletics, right? So
Okay.
I was a wrestler, which I'm sure there's a lot of bodybuilders that were wrestlers. There seems to be a correlation there. Um, weight management sport, not necessarily the healthiest weight management tactics when you
Yeah.
kind of break it down, especially like the high school
I
level.
was a lightweight rower, so trust me, it's even worse. It's like,
Perfect. Yeah. So get as light as you can,
yeah.
basically. So yeah, I was not naturally athletic. I was not naturally lean. Was not a genetic anomaly in any sense of the word. So just lost some weight. Um, Wrestling first year, I probably didn't even have a 500 record. Didn't really like that. Kept getting a little bit better. But long story short, I was like, man, there's got to be a better way for weight management. So I started researching nutrition, and a lot of the things I was stumbling across were in like fitness publications, bodybuilding magazines. I'm like, okay, so these people have something, right? Why do I keep searching for this information? This is like early, this is pre-Instagram, keep in mind.
Wow.
So why am I finding like bodybuilding? So these people know something. Now, in hindsight, the information was super rudimentary, at least compared to what we have now.
Yeah.
But that definitely helped propel me ahead and maximize my potential and manage my weight better and perform better and all that. So when I graduated high school, I had a couple partial scholarship offers for wrestling, nothing like crazy Division 1, Big Ten, nothing like that. But the schools that had offered me scholarships, they didn't really have anything I was interested in necessarily. So I opted out. I went locally, but I still liked this whole bodybuilding thing since I'd been lifting and weight training. So since I wasn't going to go to school and wrestle in college, I started prepping for my first bodybuilding show when I was still in high school.
Wow.
So I was 18 years old. I hadn't graduated yet, bringing all my meals to school, doing the whole thing. Did my first show at 18 in the teen division. It was a small federation. I think it was NGA, I think at the time is what it was, which I think they might still be around. I'm not sure. So I did that, and I was hooked. Story, right? A lot of people say
Yeah.
that. So I was doing some personal training at the time in the gym, and I think I had worked at like a supplement store, and I think also I had a part-time job at a local grocery store that had a deli. So I was actually like slicing meat and doing all that stuff. But of course, while I'm personal training and people knew that I was bodybuilding, so despite being young, people just tend to ask questions. And again, this was like right before Instagram or right around when that started. So nutrition became another aspect of that because I knew how important that was. That's where it started. I mean, it just kind of organically happened because of my environment, and I kept, you know, gaining a client here, gaining a client there. I'm like, people were going to pay me for this. Now, at the time, coaches were not charging three, four, $500 a month. This was like half the shit I did was free nutrition to go with my personal training clients,
Yeah.
or I might have charged someone like $50,
Yeah.
right? So, but that grew and grew. I was going to college, I was going to school, full-time class load, doing all that stuff. So, still competing. Fast forward, I screwed myself up competing too often, full-time
Mm.
classes, job, paying all my own bills, doing all this stuff, trying to get my nutrition business off the ground. And
Wow.
that's actually where I started learning functional health because I'm like, okay,
Mm.
well, clearly we have some limits here,
Yeah.
you know? Uh, so I really started learning through my own issues, through
Cool.
my own hormonal issues and adrenal issues and gut issues and stuff. And then of
Yeah.
course, the more I learned about it, the more my eyes were open when new clients came in. I'm like, okay, so this stuff's actually pretty prevalent.
Mm.
We're just not looking at it,
Yeah.
right? We just don't know what we don't know.
Yeah.
And this again, this was this was well before the majority of the industry had even coined that term
Yeah.
or even thought about utilizing blood work as a tool, you
Yeah.
know. So I'm dating it, it's been a while.
That's cool. Yeah, that's really interesting. It's crazy how this pendulum has kind of shifted where now everyone talks about blood work. Um, I think sometimes too much at the detriment of other ways of monitoring your health. And sometimes people are using blood work as like a license to do whatever they want if the blood work is clean or the limited health markers they check on blood work are clean. Like it's still better than not checking it, of course, but
Sure.
um, I feel like a lot of the even talking about checking your blood pressure regularly isn't talked about enough in comparison to blood work.
Yeah, so there of course are limiting factors. I mean, symptoms are symptoms. So
Yeah.
we have to look at quantitative markers, and we
Mm,
also have to look at things that are a little more abstract or a little less, or like qualitative data. I mean, it's important to see both, and I think
yeah.
that people that are a little less experienced, I don't want to say less educated, because yeah, that's the case, but I mean, everyone starts somewhere. So
Sure.
I think that just understanding how to connect symptoms with the markers, like what does this stuff actually mean. When a lot of people get into this space of functional health, they want to, because I mentor a lot of coaches, so they're like, I want to offer this service to my clients, or I know that I can be a better coach if I do. And I'm like, absolutely.
Mm,
But what you find is a lot of people are looking for the protocol and the formula, and if this says this, then it's this
mm,
type of thing. Um, so you teach that stuff. I think that it's important that you teach how to correct issues. I think it's important that you teach how to utilize these types of, quote unquote protocols, but you you'll be really limited if that's all you can do. And in fact, I would say even if you didn't know how to do that, you could still be pretty proficient just by understanding some basics of how the body works, what systems, like you talk about root cause, this whole, because that term came about right when there was functional health. Then the root cause coach, or like root cause coaching, was the next thing that came into the space. And I really don't think a lot of people are actually root cause coaching per se. um, some things are definitely great. Like there's a huge awareness of how impactful stress is, for example. Well, we know that's probably a root cause with just about everything to some extent. I mean, it's a driver for sure. But even just down to like, well, how do we address that? What's realistic? Maybe not understanding what people's lives actually look like. If you're a 22-year-old or a 20, I'm not knocking anyone. Again, I was young too, and I didn't understand this. But if you're in your early 20s and you're single, or yeah, I mean, you don't have like a lot of other stuff going on outside of bodybuilding and your job, it's kind of difficult to draw a parallel with the person that you're working with and really understand like what they're having to do on a daily basis and a weekly
yeah.
basis. So just telling them to go out and journal or walk in the grass with their shoes off, it's only going to take you so far, you know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I totally get that. That's really interesting, and I can tell you've worked with a lot of people and also a lot of coaches by the way you're talking about this too, because you've seen like very different flavors and um, like young people coaching older people with more responsibilities and vice versa. I'm sure there's all different types of situations, and you can't just like copy and paste one thing um, to a lot of those different situations.
yeah, absolutely. And you may do more harm than good, even in some cases, just by adding more layers to someone's life and making their. It's funny because when I intake new clients, one of the things I tell them is a lot of people, their cases will look kind of complex on paper, or they'll, because I think a lot of people also don't think anyone else is dealing with something that they're dealing with, or not to the
Mm.
degree that they're dealing with it, when in reality it's probably pretty common. So I'm like, yeah, I see this every 30 minutes. And they're like, oh my gosh, this is, and I'm not discounting the way that they feel. But one of the things I tell them is, this looks complex. I know there's a lot of layers here, but one of my number one goals is I never want to make your life more complicated. And they're like, oh, that's interesting. That's an
Yeah.
interesting perspective. Like, well, this is pretty complex. I said, yeah, but me me making your life even more complicated than it already is not going to drive the results that we want.
Right.
So I think that's really important to keep in mind if you're coaching, or if you're a client even coming to a coach. Kind of think about what you're feeling. Like, are you super overwhelmed? Are you really heightened about your symptoms? Is your life overwhelming?
Yeah.
If the person you're working with is contributing to that, that seems kind of
Mm,
counterintuitive, doesn't it?
yeah. Yeah, it's a really good point. I'm just reflecting on some of my own experiences when like you may have a coach who's like tracking for the sake of tracking, and getting into you tracking like 50 different variables, um, and like trying to address every single one of them each week versus like a more mature coach is like more like a sniper. They're like finding the thing that's most
Yes.
important and
Yeah.
like
It's like a
uh
heat seeking missile, right? They're
yeah,
finding
exactly.
the spots. And it's funny because the industry has gone through phases. Like, when we were able to start tracking all kinds of stuff, people found out about, well, we can use glucometers and we can track sleep and we can wear Aura rings and we can do all this stuff. That was super cool. Like, we have all this extra data. But then we found out maybe that's not good. Maybe
Yeah.
that's actually stressing people out.
Yeah.
So then some people almost dumbed it down too much. Like, oh, I'm anti protocol, I'm anti this, anti that. I'm like, why were we never needed to be here or here to begin with? We
Yeah.
always just needed to use the tools that made sense.
Yeah.
That was always the answer from the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's never changed.
It's really smart. Yeah. I see it. I see it a lot, both ends of the spectrum.
Right.
It's funny. So I wanted to focus a lot of this discussion around contest prep, which is pertinent to me. It's top of mind for me. Um, and think about like overall what makes a successful contest prep. Some of the topics around like pushing and pulling, PEDs. Um, so I guess just like starting from a high level, what are some of the things that you think make a contest prep successful, from the outset?
There's a couple things that I would say right off the bat, and these are probably just more prerequisites to starting prep. It's I I like to use kind of create this image of, it's like if you were going into prep with, and you already had a couple bullet holes in you, you're not gonna you're set up you're gonna bleed out quicker, right? Because prep is hard. It doesn't matter. There's no, outside of the some people that are just a little more genetically fortunate, no matter how good your coach is and how good your approach is, prep is taxing. There's
Mm,
no way to avoid it
sure.
unless you just don't get in shape. Then I suppose you could avoid it, but that's not a great outcome either.
Yeah.
Um, and division specific, and people might even think that like lesser condition divisions like bikini or something are easier, and in ways they can be, especially if you have great genetics for it. But even that is, I mean, we know countless stories of women competing in bikini that are atrociously messed up now,
Yeah.
so it happens. But going into it, like, again, understanding basic blood markers, hormones, GI function, also like what's your life like, what are your habits like, what are all these things like. I'll stick to this, and I'll probably die on this hill, is that part-time bodybuilders will always have the hardest time. They'll always have the
Mm,
most problems, because I think that it's not that you have to be a complete neurotic psycho in the off season, but you do need to maintain some specific routine and habits, because then the idea of transitioning to prep is actually nothing. What
yeah.
do? You change the amount of food you're eating, and maybe your activity level changes. That's really it. There's
Mm,
not anything else to it. You're not really even, you shouldn't even really notice that you're in prep, other than maybe like your hunger goes up a little bit, but you shouldn't really feel the effects of that physically and emotionally until you're much further into that
mm,
process, in which case it's been pretty subtle. So if you're set up well physically and internally, as well as you can be, and you're already, hitting those marks. So if you need some time pre prep or pre deficit to kind of like if you are someone that gets a little too far off track, if you need a little bit of time to reel yourself in and like, to do a little tune up prior, I would really suggest doing that before you jump into your prep, which is why a lot of good coaches will say, "Hey, please don't come to me 16 weeks out."
Yeah,
Very few people out. I mean, outside of like select cases are ready to rip right out of the box.
sure.
So, labs, habits, GI. Um, I mean, there's some other lesser talked about things, finances and schedule and stuff like that.
Sure.
Scheduling can be a real thing, I guess, if you have like a seasonal job or something that's ultra, ultra crazy one part of the year and maybe not another time of the year. I
Okay.
feel like people are relatively in tune with that. If you're an entrepreneurial type, pick your poison, you know, like it's just going to be hard all the time type of thing if you're really
Yeah.
busy. From an enhanced side, please don't come to your coach already blasting 3 grams a year and be like, hey, we're going to start prep next week. I'm like, oh God. So what are we going to do?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. Where
come
do you
on,
go
man.
from there?
Yeah. Like what are we going to escalate? You know? So you really need to be kind of at a baseline. Uh, and that's all assuming you have sufficient time. If you're really, really seasoned, you might have a little bit better idea of that. If you're really seasoned, you may have some historical data. Like this is where I was at weight wise when I was completely ready for my last show.
Yeah.
Here's what I weigh now. Here's what I looked like at the beginning of my last prep. Here's what I look like now.
Yeah.
That gives you a little bit of insight on time
Hmm.
frame. That helps for sure.
Hmm.
Then you maybe tack on a little extra cushion time for any unforeseen obstacles where you get sick and you lose a week.
Yeah.
Guess what? Shit happens, man. If you're grinding yourself down to like this ultra precise time frame where you have zero room for error, I mean, what are you going to
Yeah.
do? I mean, we can speed things up, right? To a point,
Yeah.
but I would much rather, it's a lot easier to slow things down than it is to speed them up.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
So,
I had 2 weeks in my last prep last year that were just totally dead. Like I got COVID in the middle of prep and I was hospitalized because I couldn't breathe.
yeah,
And that was a week. Thankfully, it was
yeah,
like
gone.
at the start. And then I had like a digestion issue crop up as a reaction to a certain drug, and it took time to solve that. But basically, there was a week and a half where I wasn't really digesting food. And so we had plenty of time, so it worked out very well. But
Right,
yeah, I mean, if it was rushed and we didn't have that extra time, then it would have been really bad.
right. And that's not even, and those are unforeseen errors. That's not taking into account like lapse and adherence errors that you never want to assume that stuff. You don't,
Yeah,
that's not something you want to plan for, but things happen. Things do happen. I
yeah,
just, even with pretty seasoned athletes, things can
yeah,
happen.
yeah, I'm sure. Yeah,
So, you always got to give yourself a little cushion.
yeah, definitely. Life happens, mistakes happen. Um, it's a thing.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, and then so I found this really fascinating, and I think I first heard you talk about it on the OPD podcast with Joe Jeffrey, which if people haven't listened to, like all of those episodes are timeless. Like go back and check them out. They're
Dude,
really
they're
good.
great, man. I might be a
Um,
little biased, but I think they're great.
they're really good. There's a lot of excellent free information in those. And I can't remember if it was 2 or 3 years ago, or you can correct me. But I think it may have been because you were just like doing a fat loss phase and seeing what happened. But you did at least part of maybe majority of a prep on like a TRT plus or cruise dose. Do you know what I'm referring to?
It was probably I'm gonna assume it was 2022, the year, because I did nationals in 22 and I did it again last year in 24. But I
Yeah,
know,
I think it
and I
was
did
22.
it. I did it similarly last year in 24, although I had a little bit more. I had slightly more solidified the plan of doing nationals, where in 22 I did not at all.
Oh, okay.
It
Wow.
was I had no, I mean, I knew I kind of was testing the water on if I felt that I was going to be ready for that once I had got down leaner and I saw
Yeah.
how I looked. So, yeah, I just basically started a fat loss phase, mini cut, like whatever you want to call it, right? Cleanup phase. And I'd gotten relatively lean. I probably got in the realm of, you know, 8 to 10 weeks out conditioning or like pretty lean.
Yeah.
And I was on, I'm prescribed TRT, so it was just that, and I think like a little GH and no fat loss agents, no
Wow.
nothing. Expenditure was just tracking steps, manipulating food. I was still having a free meal every week, although I would say I was like loosely tracking it into my plan. I'm not really I've been doing this a long time, and I think it's because I've done so many off seasons with like large amounts of food where I'm
Yeah.
completely just don't really care to even
Yeah.
eat gross shit anymore.
Yeah.
I think I'm ruined forever.
Yeah, I'm there.
um,
I'm there. I got up
uh,
to 6,500 plus calories this past off season.
I heard that it's funny. I heard that in an interview with a retired IFBB pro, and I can't remember who it was. And he's like, I'll never look at food the same. Like, I don't
Yeah.
have any desire to even eat that stuff anymore. But anyhow, long story short, yeah, I'd done most of it like that, and I think it's looking at that kind of scenario, it can be a really good scenario for a lot of people, assuming that you're not locked into like a specific professional show
Mm.
or a specific national show, because there's less pressure,
Yeah.
there's more room for whatever, like all the stuff we talked about. And it was a really, I mean, it was a pretty long process in the grand scheme of things,
Yeah.
but honestly, I just did the normal stuff that I do every day. And if we had something to do, I would just go out to dinner and do it. And I didn't really, I did all the same stuff. And then I decided a little further in the process to go ahead and pull the trigger. I had to do a qualifying show and then, you know, do nationals. And it was a really good result. At that point, my best look, which I guess that's the point every time,
Yeah.
right? Hopefully.
Yeah.
And then again, I did something pretty similar last year. I assumed I was going to do nationals, but I really didn't. Again, it was like, man, if I think I made enough improvements over where I was at in 22, I'll pull the trigger on it. And if not, I'll wait.
Yeah.
And, but a lot of that, I think a lot of that's more of just a maturity process of the person and how long they've been doing it.
Yeah.
Because I brought up this example a lot where if you've only been bodybuilding if you are younger and you've only been doing it for a few years, the idea of waiting for 2 years is really difficult to wrap your head around.
Hmm.
You've only been doing it for 3 and you've done a couple shows. The idea of waiting 2 more is crazy,
Yeah.
But if you're, it would be similar to your perception of time. I can imagine, as you get older, time goes faster. That at
Yeah.
least you feel like that. I can imagine being older, 60, 70, 80 years old, and you're like, well, a month is a day. At that point, it's like
Yeah.
nothing because you've
Yeah.
been through so much.
Yeah.
So I really think it's more of like a maturity process. It has zero to do with my me striving to win, dude. I hate losing. I want to win every time.
Yeah.
I want to get better and I want to just keep improving until I'm not competing anymore. But I'm also not attached to dates. I'm not attached to shows.
Yeah.
I do it when it makes sense, and I do it when I'm improved enough
Yeah.
to make an impact.
Yeah. I think that's great. And I think it goes back to what you were saying earlier with like being like, okay, prep starts now, 16 weeks, let's go. Like it's a healthier mindset, and it probably works a lot better with you with all the stuff you have going on professionally. And like it's also just it works. I mean, it clearly works. It's a low stress way to think about it.
Yeah, and I think it also, I try to instill that in the clients as much as I can. I get that certain things require more specific time frames, so I know that from a scheduling perspective,
Yeah.
but I really think it's a much better mindset. And you notice it's a lot less of an emotional roller coaster when you're like 16 weeks out, 20 weeks out, whatever, and you flip that switch. instantly you're excited, but excitement is stress.
Hmm.
And I'm not telling no one to be happy. That would be like a weird take, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
But you kind of, what goes up must come down, man. I mean, the more the more pressure you put on something and the more emotion you put into something, the harder, I think the harder the downs are, the harder that stuff is. So if you can try to ride that midline, celebrate the wins when they're there, and kind of ride that midline a little bit more, it's a lot easier. And I think I even try to teach that with the coaches I work with is you have to, I think your demeanor as a coach is very important. You should be confident and celebrate, but you should be calm. You know,
Mm.
if I can't tell you how many times I've had those clients where they go to these coaches or these teams and things, and it's the hype machine. It's hype,
Mm.
hype, hype, hype,
Yeah.
hype, and then they do the show. The client's not important anymore because they're not competing. They get dropped off by the wayside. They're like completely lost. They don't know what's going on. They drop the coach,
Yeah.
and they're like, "Man, that was such a kind of a bad experience." And I said,
Yeah.
"Well, it's partially, I don't really like to fault the client, but I also try to educate them on this kind of stuff we're talking about is like, this is why I
Yeah.
don't act like that."
Yeah. You set yourself up to fail, in a way.
For sure.
And can you just articulate, like, because I try to tell people this a lot. They're like, oh, I'm going into prep. I need to really bring up the gear as high as possible, because this is prep time. Like, the reason, one thing I learned from your discussions with Joe, like so early on, is that you need a lot less to maintain than to grow. Like, growing is when, for most people, for most at least male bodybuilders who are trying to add size, that's like the time to escalate PEDs appropriately, of course. Um, can you talk about like why that worked, doing like so much of your prep on TRT?
Yeah, I don't think up until when you're more compromised, and when I say compromised, so, lower body fat,
Yeah,
there's less of energy substrate there. There's less body fat that can be released into the bloodstream to be used as energy and things. So of course, your body might start tapping into muscle tissue a little bit at that point. Um, so that would be a time to have something, to have more androgens in.
yeah,
But if you really think about what androgens do, I mean, they do several things, but from a muscle perspective, they work great. From a retention perspective, they decrease, muscle protein turnover. So like how much is being like catabolized in a sense. They increase muscle protein synthesis, so like muscle growth, right? Help accelerate that process. But everything we know from, even from a research perspective, even down to training, is what it takes to maintain is less than what it takes to go above homeostasis and grow new tissue. So you can, I would almost, again, like everyone's a little bit different in the severity of people's preps, and what categories they're in and how big they are might dictate them needing a little bit more to maintain the amount of tissue. But I would also say that like some of the really big guys have such good genetics anyhow that offsets that a little bit,
yeah,
you know? So there's that whole thing.
sure.
Uh, but yeah, the idea would be to really utilize the androgens to grow efficiently in spurts, right? You're not necessarily like, hopefully not blasting super physiological amounts constantly.
Yeah,
But then in prep, you're thinking of, I like to think of prep as a few things. It's like fatigue management, the best that you can, right? Which I know we had talked about, maybe talking refeeding a little bit and
yeah,
some of that stuff. So fatigue management, training at a level that makes sense, like a volume and intensity that makes sense. If you're trying to hit PRs 3 weeks out from your show, one, it's really probably pretty stupid from a recovery debt
yeah.
standpoint. And two, if you actually are hitting PRs 2 or 3 weeks out from the show, you probably didn't train hard enough in the offseason. There is absolutely no way that most people should be hitting PRs that close to a show or even
Yeah,
close just, I mean, even just from a body weight perspective, you have so much less leverage,
Yeah.
when you weigh a lot less and you have less cushion in the joints and less
Yeah.
fluid on you and all that stuff. So it's like maintaining, what can you recover from? What can you continue to replicate that helps you hold on to the most strength? We know that from the training research. We know that anecdotally. Same thing with PEDs. We know like more is probably better up to the point that it's causes too much stress. There's probably kind of an inverted curve there
Mhm.
where we see that in people. There's a lot of people that speculate that, and like higher level people, or maybe there's a look on stage that's, like, that person looks kind of beat to shit,
Yeah.
you know the skin color, the way their physique looks, there's like some of that visual stuff that you kind of pick up on as you've
Sure.
been doing it for a while. So there's definitely more does more does work, and just until it doesn't.
Yeah.
And also a side effect perspective, like looking at um some of the androgens that are more susceptible to impacting your sleep, like trenbolone and stuff like that, or even fat loss agents, clenbuterol, super long half life. I mean, man, if you got to think, what would, if you took two scenarios, if you were to use more of something and your sleep was absolutely horrendous and you felt terrible, or you took a little bit less and you could mitigate that and you were sleeping a little bit better because that's already compromised in prep. Do you really think that that 1% or 2% of extra benefit is going to offset chronic sleep deprivation for
Yeah.
months on end? I mean, I really doubt it.
Yeah.
I mean, not in my experience. In my experience, people generally look better with better fatigue management.
Yeah. Definitely.
I mean, that's just me talking. So
Yeah.
take that for what it's worth.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting. I think it's also like very individual how people, of course, everything's individual, but um, like how different drugs affect people's fatigue, I think is really interesting. Like
Yeah.
for me, for instance, I feel like some people feel that it ruins their sleep, their anxiety goes up when they take clenbuterol. I'm a lifelong asthmatic. So when
You
I
probably feel
take
good on it. You can
I
breathe.
I sleep better than I've ever slept in my life when I take Clem. So it's just really interesting how drugs affect people differently.
Yeah. I even think that people's kind of like baseline neurochemistry matters. What you're are you more of a dopamine seeker? Are you a little bit lower mood? Are you a pretty anxious person naturally? Do you have ADHD? Are you a little more on the neurotic type A? Those things could all be indicators. There's some patterns there as to how that affects certain people. I mean, it's like what they say with alcohol. It just makes you more of what you are
Mm,
when when you've got a buzz or whatever. So maybe you could kind of translate gear in that same way. Is there
mm,
something in there that you're amplifying,
yeah,
perhaps, or it's affecting your neurochemistry based on what your baseline is?
yeah, that makes sense. And then like I think the framework I've heard you talk about for PD escalation in the off season is like, and forgive me if I'm miscategorizing this, I heard it from someone else, but it's like if you're, otherwise your health markers and everything, your blood work is in check. If you're making progress, first try adding, or if you're stalling out, first try adding food. And then, if you just get fatter, um, and gym performance doesn't improve, then maybe it's a time to increase PD
Right.
load, escalate androgens. What do you use to make that decision in prep? Because it's different, right? It's you're not necessarily getting stronger in the gym. There's other things you're paying attention to. So, what are some of the um, inputs that guide whether you increase PED load or add new agents as a
Yeah.
prep goes?
Strength is probably still a pretty good indicator. I mean, granted, you're probably trying to minimize how much it's declining,
Yeah.
but that would still be a pretty good indicator. And that's assuming, you know, that's assuming it's not just strictly a fatigue thing. Like, when's the last time you've had a deload? When's the last time you've taken a day off? Have you had more stress lately? What's your sleep like? I mean, is there anything environmentally that would be causing an acute or chronic response there? You should start, maybe, if there's a lot of indicators there, maybe you should start with that, like trying to reduce the fatigue first.
Mm,
Um, and then that could be an indication of like time to bump the dose. I think even me and a lot of people's like, we still have an outline that we're kind of looking at going into
yeah.
it. It's just we might change the time frames, like I did with a guy recently. For that reason, we had kind of checked off all those other boxes, and so we made an escalation a little earlier than we had planned, because of that, what they were looking like from like a muscle tissue perspective and
Yeah.
fullness and all that stuff. So visually, visually that would be another one. But again, that could also be food related. So I think that knowing what the difference is between flat and full in that person, and
Mm,
and also like the whole muscle tissue loss thing, it kind of creeps up on you in prep. Next thing you know, like, uh-oh,
your
that
legs
got
are
a
going.
lot smaller. um but that's assuming, again, I mean, that's assuming you weren't just fat. I mean, like, if you've got 2 inches of subcutaneous fat, I mean, that's probably a being a bit dramatic. But if you have a lot of subcutaneous fat tissue, stuff's gonna get smaller.
Yeah.
Like, there's no way to, like, circumference of the area is going to shrink. I mean, that's
Yeah.
just how it is.
Yeah.
But the other good thing about what we said earlier about not going into that situation on peak doses already is hopefully escalating throughout that process will offset a lot of that, right? Because you have somewhere to go.
Mhm.
Um, are you going to grow into the show? Probably not,
Yeah.
unless you just were kind of messing around in the off season, or you're just a very, very genetically blessed and a hyper responder.
Yeah.
But and I think a lot of people may look at pros and look at stuff, and I'm like, listen, this is like 1% over here. Like,
Yeah.
don't compare. That's not a good baseline to compare to.
Yeah. It's crazy to me still how little some people understand genetics changes things.
It's like
It's
it's like these things online, like the natty or not and all this stuff. And yeah, some of it's total bullshit, of course,
yeah.
but when you're around long enough, you start to kind of understand there are some serious outliers out there. Like, there's uh and even if you looked, all you have to do is look in other sports and like look around. There's people that probably don't know anything about PDs and have never taken them, are just freaks. And if they were bodybuilders, oh my God,
Yeah, that's a
they're
good
all
point.
over the place. Dude, there's
Yeah.
people all over the place like that.
Yeah.
And but I think it's maybe partially I don't know, maybe it's like a jealousy thing that they're like, they can't possibly be that good.
Natural.
One of the guys that I work with generally towards the end of my preps, he preps a lot of natural bodybuilders.
Cliff Wilson.
The
Yeah.
Cliff, so he preps
Yeah.
a lot of pro natural bodybuilders, and we talked about that. And I've seen a lot of his guys, and I'm like, some of the dudes are just absolute freaks,
Yeah.
dude.
Yeah.
Now, granted, a lot of the natural guys are pretty light on stage, and the pictures, obviously,
Sure.
if you saw them in person, you're like, okay, well, they're kind of not very big.
Yeah.
But dude, there's some people
Yeah.
there's some people in those federations that are super impressive and be like, oh, they can't be national. I'm like, dude, they are.
Yeah.
I hate to
No,
break it to you.
it's crazy. There are like some tall natural bodybuilders that are like close to or even over 200 pounds on stage, which is just absolutely wild
Dude,
to me.
bonkers.
Yeah.
Bonkers. There was a guy backstage at Nationals that was um he had just started bodybuilding, and I guess the prep was like his first cycle or whatever, and this dude was a freak. Oh my God. This isn't even fair. Why am I here?
Yeah. Time to take up ping pong.
Yeah, but do something else.
Um, yeah, and then a thing I'd love to understand, because this has always been like very hard for me to understand for myself at least, is how you think about when to dig and when to refeed a client. when you're getting like further along in prep, like past the initial weeks, once they're starting to get in shape, how do you think about like how long to dig, and how do you like to refeed as well?
Yeah, the time frame again, like where are you at in vicinity to how much time you have left is always a big consideration.
Yeah.
Assuming you're not way behind, hopefully you're
Yeah.
not, but assuming you're at least a little ahead or on pace in that you're in the ballpark, you know. Um, I think that first and foremost, I like to think of refeeding not just as food. I think it's a good fatigue management opportunity.
Mm.
When you think of when we look at all the again, I'm not dead set on the research, but I think some of it is helpful. we don't we never really seen anything super definitive. Anecdotally, we see some good stuff, but from like a science perspective, increasing, carbohydrates for a day or 2 days or whatever it is, it's does something, but it's not much,
Mm.
in terms of raising basal metabolic rate.
Yeah.
It helps probably helping like glucocorticoid management, cortisol levels, modulating that. So maybe improving thyroid hormone conversion and stuff like that. But here's a really easy way to think about it. If you thought, okay, well, we know that in theory, a refeed would increase our BMR very subtly, but our refeed is, I don't know, let's say it's you're giving someone an extra 500 calories. Is it increasing your BMR that much to offset eating an extra
Yeah.
500 calories for, maybe 2 days? So that's 1,000 extra calories.
Yeah.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
Probably not. So, I mean, from a metabolic standpoint, it's probably not the thing that's
Yeah.
going to propel you. Now, what it does do is we know from an adherence standpoint, I think the adherence thing's interesting because some people they start eating carbohydrates and they can't stop. So you got to be
Yeah.
real careful with
Yeah.
refeeds. Like, man, I would rather just not even do it.
Yeah.
Um, but it can definitely help give you a little bit of pep. It's something to look forward to. People are humans. Maybe it'll help with adherence for certain people. Um, but it also, like I said, it also is a fatigue management tool. So when you're thinking of it, don't just think food, also think how else can you change caloric balance? So
Mm.
reduce cardio, reduce, maybe do it on a non-training day,
Yeah.
stuff like that,
Lower
because it
steps that
will,
day.
yeah, because it definitely will have an effect from inflammatory standpoint, from cortisol modulation standpoint, from of course like filling the muscle out a little bit and stuff. So I got away, I would say at some point I probably got away from doing really large refeeds with people. There's still a few people that maybe need those, but I kind of got away from that and I was focusing more on smaller to moderate refeeds depending on the person
Mm.
and reducing output because when you're reducing output, if you do less cardio, you're burning less calories, so net calorie balance, it's like increasing food similarly,
Yeah.
right? But you're also reducing fatigue. So you're kind of getting two benefits from
Mm.
that with one move,
Yeah, that's
right?
a really good point.
Because when you get really fatigued, you could eat, dude, you could eat 9,000 calories and outside of some temporary uh dopamine and serotonin, you're probably gonna feel like shit again
Yeah.
pretty shortly after.
Yeah.
I mean, you might get a little better pump the next day or something,
Yeah.
but it's not I found a study that was interesting. Like they had depleted athletes, they depleted people down, and then they found that carbohydrates, like lean people, and I wish I had the name of the study, but I had taught a class on this, and I put it in the class, and they said that the refeeding of carbohydrates actually did not impact performance.
Huh. Interesting.
So some people are like, well, I train better. I have a little better training sessions. I think it's because you're in a better mood.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
it's just because you're like, man, I get some carbs and you're just in a little bit better
Yeah.
mood on that day. You're not 5 days, 6 days away from your
Yeah.
last refeed where you're like, oh my
Sure.
God, I'm just barely alive.
Yeah.
It's probably more of like a perceived
Yeah. Psychological, which is important.
benefit,
Yeah.
which is still great. Like it's still helpful. Um, but yeah, I'm a big fan of, with a lot of people using it as more of a way to give them, and when I say low to moderate, I mean maybe it's 100 carbs, maybe it's 300 if someone needs more,
Yeah.
but doing it over the course of, a day, 2 days, if we're really getting a great effect, maybe we'll do it longer. If something's working, we'll just keep going.
Yeah.
No reason to stop. But also reducing cardio, maybe completely eliminating it during that time for one of the days or both of the days. Maybe if they're really, really beat into the ground, maybe taking a couple days off training and cardio and adding a little bit of extra food
Mm,
in there. Again, if you're reducing expenditure that much, you probably don't want to add that much food.
yeah.
Probably don't need to. But so what I'm really looking at is fatigue, gym performance. And when, like, plateaus and weight loss are interesting because I think in an ideal world, you would kind of spot it before you completely stalled for days on end.
Yeah.
So if you see this pattern in this person where they're kind of like dropping and then it slows way down and you stall for a day, that might be an opportunity to go ahead and do it versus wasting 4 or 5 days where you're making zero progress and then
Mm,
be like, man, you really need a refeed. I'm like, well,
yeah.
we could have done that 3 or 4
Yeah.
days ago, and that probably takes a little more experience to kind of see it
Yeah.
early. Um, but a lot of that's just like pattern recognition in the
Yeah.
individual themselves, and you can kind of do it early. The nice thing about that is you're doing it before the fatigue hole gets too deep,
Yeah.
right? So you can do it early, and then you don't need that much.
Yeah.
The idea would be to not leave someone there for a week or 2 weeks where they're just completely obliterated and not making any progress, because then that 1 day refeed or 2 day refeed is going to, it might not even be enough
Yeah.
to bring them back,
Yeah. Yeah.
so I think trying to do it a little bit early, spotting the signs a little earlier is ideal.
Yeah. Definitely. I think it actually worked out really well for me in my last prep. We started the prep, so I need a lot of food. I mean, I was on stage at 193. I'm not a big guy. Um, and I'm like 5'9". And so the start of prep, we were doing 1,000 grams of carbs 3 days a week. And then we moved to two, and then we moved to one. And then we kind of got in this pattern where we were going between like 3,300 calories were the quote unquote dig days. And then like 44,000-ish were like the when we would step off. And we'd usually do like 3 or 4 dig days, 2 or 3 step off days. And that seemed to work really well. And it was all based on like biofeedback, the look, how the scale was moving. But that also, and the next thing I wanted to ask you about was peak week. That set up peak week really well because then we knew like what it took for me to fill back up. We knew how long it took. We knew what foods worked well. And so that set it up really well. But I'm curious how you think about peaking, and like what variables you typically manipulate. Do you do a lot of electrolyte stuff? Is it more food? How do you think about it?
In an ideal world, you do as little as possible.
Okay.
I mean, really,
Yeah.
really get ready early and kind of use a more linear approach where you
Yeah.
can you can step things back over the course of multiple days.
Sure.
I know that there are other situations they probably require a little more time to discuss, like weight cap or something, I
Yeah.
suppose. And I'm not talking a pound or two. I'm talking like, 4, 5, 6 pounds, like bigger weight cap cuts and stuff.
Yeah.
Classic physique, pro level people that are really having to pull down, that type of thing. But I generally would want that data, like looking at that data from prep. So like one of the guys that's getting ready to compete here in a couple weeks, I've when I'm refeeding him, I've been looking at him in different scenarios. So one day after, 2 days after, I've tried less food, more cardio reduction, a little more food, less cardio reduction.
Mm.
I even did one where we just dropped cardio for 2 days with no extra food.
Huh.
And I kind of wanted to see which of those elicited the
Yeah.
best
That's really
look.
cool.
So stuff like that, where I can kind of see like, okay, which of these levers is going to give us the best look, because a lot of the peak week is filling out, but it's also inflammation, inflammation reduction. So you can kind of figure out what you're learning there is like, how soon do I need to pull the cardio down or eliminate the cardio? And that, especially for smaller divisions like bikini or something, they may not even need that much food.
Mm.
It's not like, I mean, I don't, probably not loading a bikini girl on 1,000 grams of carbs over 2 days. It's
Yeah.
just like, get her legs and glutes less inflamed and give her a little bit of carbs. Like, you're done.
Yeah.
You don't really need a whole lot. Um, from an electrolyte perspective, I mean, I definitely do some, but I would say that I'm not. I mean, I have most of my people drink water. They'll probably drink. I mean, a lot of my guys, especially, will drink like 2 gallons of water on Friday. Maybe a gallon if we're already a little spilled and we're trying to pull it down a little bit.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll reduce it a tiny bit. But a lot of the time we're still drinking pretty regular water. I might increase sodium. I might increase sodium slightly, um, like day of show, for
Mm.
example.
Okay.
Try to get a little better pump there. I might increase sodium slightly, around larger uh, loading days if we're doing that to facilitate some of that glucose transport. But in general, electrolytes are relatively static. I'm probably, in some scenarios, I might have a little bit more potassium through the week and then kind of push more towards sodium when our carbs come up again to drive that into the tissue.
Okay.
Like, look at like how glucose is transported in the muscle tissue. But you don't, and again, like if there's diuretics in there, and if we're using anything like that, it's almost always extremely small.
Yeah.
It's like a quarter of a tab of diazide or something
Yeah.
like that, where it's like, man, we went a little bit too far with the water.
Yeah.
We're going to bring this back down a little bit.
Yeah.
You also, I think a mistake that people make a lot of the time too is um, trying to do too much on show day. Dude, there's only so much you can do. I mean, you can put as much food in there as you want. Most of it's still going to be sitting in your digestive tract
Yeah.
by the time you get on stage. So I
Getting it.
really, if you're concerned about it, or if you're someone that flattens out easily or has a fast metabolism, requires a lot of food, you probably ought to maybe spill a little bit on the night before, and you're going to wake up looking pretty darn good
Yeah.
the morning of. I really wouldn't want someone to have their morning dry look on Friday night,
Mm.
because you're going to be screwed Saturday morning.
Yeah. Yeah.
The people make that mistake, like, man, I look great Saturday night, and then I cut my water off and I took a diuretic, and I'm like, yeah. And then I couldn't catch back up.
Yeah, of course.
So,
Especially if you're a open bodybuilder or something.
yeah, bigger people, and I think there's a lot of other small things that people can look at, like, can you get a pump? Yes, no. What's your urine color? Even that's a one that I'll ask. Like, if someone's starting to flatten out a little bit and they're like, my urine's getting kind of dark, so we need water.
Yeah.
It's
Easy.
not hard. It's kind of like, you can use those cues. Water, assuming there's enough food, water's a pretty big variable for people. They can, like, morning of the show is another great example. If they cut water a little too hard and they wake up, like, well, I'm thinking in my head, you were full last night, you've eaten a lot, you just slept, probably didn't burn off too much, your pee is pretty dark. It's funny, they'll drink 16 ounces of water, said wait like 30 minutes, try to pump up a little bit. Man, I look completely different. Yeah, it's just water.
Yeah.
So but but again, like, there's a lot of little things you learn over time. And if you're inexperienced, man, look at your refeeds, look at where you look best,
Mm.
go slow, don't do anything drastic,
Yeah.
get in shape.
Yeah.
The people that are in the best shape have to do the least.
Yeah.
It's not hard. I mean, I worked with people in all different shapes and sizes, and generally the people that are just ready are not hard.
Yeah.
And you have a little more room for error. Even if you're 5% off, you just like can't even really notice it.
Yeah.
So makes it nice.
Yeah. I think if people want like a case study, looking at just like John Jewett and a bunch of his videos, and I mean, he puts out so much free information about what he's doing, but like he really doesn't make any drastic moves. Even when he was fitting into 212, like he wouldn't do any kind of crazy cutting to get there. He would just, slowly deficit into it and not refeed too hard and then
Yep.
fill up.
Crazy.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Austin. I know you have to run. This has been excellent. I feel like I could talk to you for another 4 hours about things, but really appreciate your time. I'll have a link to your YouTube and IMH and your Instagram in the bio. Is there anything else you want to direct people towards?
Now, if you can make it to the Instagram, the link tree in the bio has all the other stuff, and my email's in there. If you want to
Cool.
inquire about any services, feel free to shoot me an email.
Awesome. Thank you, Austin.
Awesome, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. Have a good one.
You too.